It was a rainy Saturday afternoon in Lagos. The kind of rain that made traffic worse and thoughts deeper. Anita sat in her usual corner at Glow and Go Salon, flipping through a half-wet magazine and pretending to care about celebrity gossip. But truthfully, her mind was elsewhere, on marriage, of course. She was 32, single, thriving at work, glowing on Instagram, and completely tired of people asking, "So, when are you settling down?" Out of nowhere, Mama Kemi, the neighborhood's most unpredictable prophetess, walked into the salon like she owned the place. With her long beaded braids, 5 rings on each finger, and a dramatic scarf, she was impossible to ignore. She never came for hair. She came with messages. And that day, her message was for Anita. "You," Mama Kemi said, pointing at Anita. "Your husband is coming soon. His name is Joe." Just like that. No last name. No address. No sign from heaven. Just Joe. 3 weeks later, Anita found herself in the most unexpected situation. She had met not 1, not 2, but 5 men. All named Joe. There was Joe the doctor, calm, intelligent, and a bit too serious. Joe the artist, emotional, soulful, and covered in paint half the time. Joe the tech guy, funny, logical, and always looking at his smartwatch. Joe the entrepreneur, ambitious, charming, and always on the move. And Joe the teacher, kind-hearted, grounded, and with the patience of a monk. She liked all of them. A lot. They were her type in different ways, and the fact that they were all named Joe. It felt like the universe was playing games. She planned to go back to Mama Kemi for clarity, but when she got to the house at the edge of Iredale Street, the gate was locked. A neighbor came out slowly and shook her head. "Mama Kemi passed away yesterday," she said softly. And just like that, Anita was on her own. Anita decided to start her journey with the most straightforward of the 5, Joe the doctor. They met at a coffee shop in Victoria Island, one of those cozy places where the air smelled like roasted beans and calm ambition. Joe wore a crisp shirt and glasses that made him look even more serious than he was. He spoke in calm tones, explained things like the human body was a puzzle he could solve with enough caffeine. They talked about work, about stress, about how hard it is to find someone genuine in a city like Lagos. He was kind. He was respectful. He made her laugh with dry jokes about patient stories, never using names, of course. But Anita couldn't help noticing something missing. Something invisible. A spark, maybe. Or that feeling in your stomach when someone walks in and the world tilts slightly. Still, it was just one date. She told herself not to rush. Maybe the connection would grow. Next up was Joe the artist. He lived in a flat that looked like an explosion of color, canvases stacked against walls, music playing from a speaker in the corner, and the faint scent of turpentine floating in the air. They sipped red wine from mismatched cups and talked about dreams, emotions, and that fine line between love and obsession. Joe painted with his heart, spoke like a poet, and touched her hand like it was part of a sculpture he was still molding. Anita was drawn to him, deeply. There was intensity there, a wild energy that excited her. But also, a kind of chaos. He talked about past lovers like they were still living in his studio walls. He had passion, yes. But could she trust that passion to last longer than a season? On the ride home, she wondered, was love supposed to feel like fire, or like home? Third on the list was Joe the tech guy. They met at a startup networking event in Lekki, and Anita liked his vibe from the start. He was sharp, funny in that sarcastic way, and always had a tech analogy for everything. "You know," he said during their dinner at a rooftop lounge, "relationships are like apps. Some look great but crash all the time. Some are stable but boring. The good ones, they just run smooth, quietly in the background." She laughed. It was the first time she felt mentally aligned. Joe talked about solving problems, about systems that work, about planning a future. He was dependable, communicative, and thoughtful in small ways. He ordered her favorite drink without asking, remembered she hated cucumber in her salad. But somewhere between logic and laughter, Anita felt something odd. It was as though she were on a date with a very advanced robot. Everything was great on paper. But emotionally, it felt too programmed. Then came Joe the entrepreneur, Mr. Ambition himself. He picked her up in a sleek black car, smelled like success, and talked like a TED Talk. Everything about him screamed winner, from the way he carried himself to the confidence in his voice. They had dinner at one of those high-end restaurants where you need a reservation weeks ahead. He ordered for both of them without asking, told her stories about business deals, travel, and dreams so big they barely fit in the room. He was exciting, magnetic, and yes, attractive in that take-charge way. But Anita noticed something else too. He didn't ask her many questions. It was always him, his plans, his vision. When he dropped her off, he said, "I really like you. I think you'd fit perfectly into my life." She smiled politely, but her heart tugged. Fit into his life. What about building one together? The last of the 5 was Joe the teacher. They met for a simple lunch near the public library. He wore a clean blue shirt, carried a worn-out novel in his bag, and greeted the waitress by name. Instantly, Anita felt a wave of calm wash over her. Joe had a voice that felt like a warm blanket, steady, reassuring, and full of thought. They spoke about life, family, purpose. He asked her questions, not the kind meant to impress, but the kind that showed he actually wanted to know who she was. He wasn't flashy, not loud. But he listened with his full body. When she spoke, he leaned in, not for flirtation, but for understanding. When their plates were cleared and the conversation wound down, he said, "I believe people don't fall in love, they grow into it, like a garden you tend every day." Anita left that lunch full, not just from the food, but from something deeper. After seeing all 5 Joes, Anita took a weekend off. No text. No calls. She turned her phone off, stayed indoors, cooked for herself, and journaled like her life depended on it. She listed pros and cons. Who made her feel the most alive? Who made her feel the most safe? Who asked about her dreams? Who listened when she spoke? It wasn't easy. Each Joe had something special. Joe the doctor, safe but distant. Joe the artist, passionate but unstable. Joe the tech guy, reliable but robotic. Joe the entrepreneur, thrilling but self-centered. Joe the teacher, simple, quiet, but maybe, just maybe, real. By Sunday night, she knew what she had to do, spend more time with each of them, not to find flaws, but to look for the one thing that couldn't be faked. Truth. Anita decided not to tell any of the Joes about the others. She wanted to observe them naturally, without pressure or competition. So she arranged another round of dates, this time, more intentional. First up was Joe the doctor. They visited an art exhibition, Anita's idea, just to see how he'd react outside his comfort zone. He was polite, asked a few questions about the pieces, but checked his phone often. "I have a night shift later," he said. "You know how it is." She nodded. He was dedicated. But even in the quiet beauty of the gallery, he never really looked at the art, or her, for more than a few seconds at a time. Anita realized then, kindness wasn't always the same as connection. Next was Joe the artist. They went to the beach, barefoot and free, with a bottle of palm wine and a speaker blasting soft Afro-jazz. They laughed, danced, and shared secrets under the stars. Joe recited poems to her in the moonlight. It was beautiful. Raw. But just when things felt perfect, his mood shifted. A song reminded him of his ex, and suddenly, he was distant, brooding. "I'm just complicated," he said, eyes full of storms. Anita sat beside him quietly, unsure whether to comfort him or protect herself. Passion was powerful. But it could also burn. As the waves crashed behind them, she wondered, could love survive this kind of turbulence? This time, Anita planned a spontaneous outing with Joe the tech guy. No structure, no schedule, just vibes. She asked him to join her on a random walk through the open-air art market in Yoba. At first, it looked like he was glitching. Wait, no plan. No destination. She laughed. Just trust me. He tried. He really did. He held her hand, made corny jokes, and even bought her a hand-carved necklace. But he kept checking Google Maps to make sure we weren't looping, and asked the price of every item like it was a data point in a business pitch. They sat under a tree eating suya, and he said, I had fun. But I prefer when things are predictable. That sentence lingered. Anita smiled, but inside, something dimmed. Love, she realized, needed room to dance. Her next date was with Joe the entrepreneur, who surprised her with a helicopter ride over the city. It was bold, lavish, unforgettable. From the sky, Lagos looked like a dream, patches of chaos stitched together by traffic and tin roofs. He leaned in, whispering, this is just the beginning. We could build an empire together. It sounded sweet. Almost seductive. But as they landed, Anita noticed something. He never once asked how she felt up there. It was all about impressing, dazzling, winning. Later, over champagne, he said, imagine the power couple we'd be. And in that moment, Anita saw it clearly. He wasn't looking for a wife. He was looking for a business partner who smiled well in photos. She clinked her glass against his and said nothing. Sometimes silence said everything. Finally, Anita spent the day with Joe the teacher again. No flash, no plan, just a visit to a community center where he volunteered on weekends, teaching children how to read. She watched as he knelt beside a little boy struggling with a sentence, gently guiding him, patient like time itself. There was no ego in it. Just presence. Afterward, they walked through a quiet park. No big speeches. Just shared stories about childhood, mistakes, and favorite foods. At one point, Anita asked, what's your biggest dream? Joe smiled. To live a simple life full of meaning. With someone who doesn't need fireworks to feel lit up. She didn't say anything back. But in that moment, her heart did something it hadn't done with the others. It exhaled. That night, Anita stood in front of her bathroom mirror, toothbrush in hand, hat in limbo. 5 men. 5 paths. 5 versions of the future. Each Joe had taught her something. About love. About herself. About the kind of life she truly wanted. The doctor showed her that kindness is noble, but not always enough. The artist reminded her that passion without peace is a storm. The tech guy made her value stability, but also made her crave unpredictability. The entrepreneur showed her the thrill of ambition, but not the warmth of intimacy. And the teacher, he brought her quiet clarity. She stared at her reflection, toothbrush still foaming. Then she laughed. This is wild, she whispered to herself. How did I end up in a real-life romantic riddle? But deep down, she was starting to believe that maybe, just maybe, her heart already knew the answer. That night, Anita had a dream. She was standing in the middle of a vast desert. The sky above her shifted colors like mood rings, red, gold, blue. In the distance, 5 figures walked toward her, each wearing a mask. All 5 called out her name, Anita. Their voices blended like a choir, echoing through the sand. She asked, which one of you is Joe? None answered. Instead, each man held out a different gift, a stethoscope, a paintbrush, a smartwatch, a gold coin, and a book. Then one man stepped forward. He held nothing. Just looked at her with steady eyes. Sometimes, he said softly, the right one isn't the loudest, he's the one who waits for you to see him clearly. She woke up before dawn, heart pounding. Anita had an idea. She decided to invite each Joe to a casual dinner at her place, individually, of course. Same meal. Same setting. No distractions. Just them and conversation. She called it her final test, even though she wasn't quite sure what she was testing for. First up was Joe the doctor. He brought wine, complimented her cooking, and asked about her blood pressure like a true professional. They talked about health, routines, and long shifts. But by the end of the night, he looked at his watch 3 times. Next came Joe the artist, who arrived barefoot and recited a new poem at her doorway. Dinner turned into a dramatic monologue, complete with tears and sudden laughter. I feel your soul, Anita, he said, eyes wide. But do you feel mine? She smiled politely as she cleared the plates, feeling more like his audience than his partner. The others would come soon. And she was listening more closely than ever. Next to visit was Joe the tech guy. He arrived exactly on time, 7 p.m. sharp, holding a perfectly wrapped box. It's a smart mug, he said. It keeps your tea at the perfect temperature. Anita laughed. That's impressively unnecessary. Thank you. Dinner was pleasant. Polite. Measured. He complimented her seasoning, analyzed her spice choices like a data sheet, and even offered to create a grocery tracking app for her. But when she asked him how he felt about her, he paused. Calculated. Then said, I think we're compatible. Statistically, our personalities align very well. She nodded, though her heart did not. Love wasn't a statistic. And comfort wasn't chemistry. As he left, he gave her a polite hug, firm, predictable. And in that moment, Anita realized, she didn't want her life to feel like soft war. Then came Joe the entrepreneur, in a tailored suit, with a bottle of imported wine and a phone that didn't stop buzzing. He complimented her furniture, asked about her 5-year goals, and pitched a few couple ventures they could launch together. You'd be great with branding, he said. We could turn this whole love thing into a business model. Anita raised an eyebrow. Love thing? He chuckled, adjusting his gold watch. You know what I mean, connection, partnership, legacy. Big picture stuff. She smiled, but her gut clenched. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being interviewed for a role instead of pursued from the heart. When he stood to leave, he said, let me know what you decide. I move fast, I can't afford to wait too long. Anita watched him go. And this time, she didn't feel torn. The evening with Joe the teacher was a complete contrast. No flashy gifts. No fancy talk. Just simplicity. They sat on her balcony, watching the city lights flicker below. He brought his old guitar, strumming soft melodies as they talked about the books they loved, the places they wanted to visit, and the dreams they quietly carried in their hearts. He didn't rush. He didn't try to impress her with grand ideas or promises. He simply was. In that quiet, steady way that made Anita feel at home. At one point, she asked, what's the best lesson you've learned about love? Joe paused for a moment, then smiled gently. Love isn't about the fireworks. It's about the quiet moments, the ones that build you up slowly, over time. Anita felt something shift inside her, something she hadn't felt with any of the other Joes. It wasn't loud or overwhelming. It was just right. After all the dinners, the dates, the moments of doubt and confusion, Anita sat in her living room late that night, replaying everything in her mind. Each Joe had brought something valuable. But only one made her heart feel like it could finally breathe. The doctor was dependable but distant. The artist was passionate but unstable. The tech guy was reliable but too rigid. The entrepreneur was exciting but self-centered. But Joe the teacher, he didn't try to impress her. He simply saw her, understood her, and was willing to build a future, not based on ambition or perfection, but on quiet understanding and patience. Anita closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She already knew who her heart was calling for. She had known for a while. The real Joe was the one who was steady, present, and kind. The next morning, Anita woke up with a feeling of clarity she hadn't had in weeks. She had made her decision. But she didn't want to rush. This time, she needed to be certain that her heart wasn't just reacting, but truly choosing. She called Joe the teacher and invited him over for a coffee. As soon as he arrived, she could tell something was different. His smile was warm, his energy calm. There was no tension, no games, just a simple, genuine connection. They sat on the balcony once again, this time talking about their hopes for the future. He asked her what she wanted most out of life, and she told him, a love that's steady, real, and built slowly. He nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. I think that's what we all want. It was then that Anita knew. It wasn't about the intensity or the speed of love, it was about the patience to grow together, to weather life's storms, and to savor the quiet moments. The kind of love that wasn't just about sparks, it was about trust and mutual understanding. Weeks went by, and Anita and Joe the teacher spent more time together. The days were filled with laughter, deep conversations, and the simplicity of just being in each other's presence. She felt at ease with him, like she could let go of all the pretenses and just be herself. One evening, as they walked through the city park hand in hand, Joe stopped and turned to her. His expression was soft, thoughtful. Anita, he began, I've been thinking a lot about everything we've talked about. And I believe we've built something real here, something worth holding on to. Anita's heart skipped a beat. She had no idea where he was going with this. I want to ask you something, Joe continued, taking a deep breath. Would you be willing to build this life with me? Not just for a moment, but for the rest of our lives. He knelt down, pulled out a small, simple ring, and looked up at her with the most sincere eyes. Anita felt tears welling up in her eyes. She didn't need grand gestures. She didn't need fireworks. All she needed was this moment, this man, who had patiently waited for her to see the truth. Yes, she said, her voice breaking. Yes, I will. After the proposal, life seemed to move in a gentle rhythm. The excitement of the engagement was there, but more than that, it was the feeling of two people learning how to walk together, side by side. Anita and Joe the teacher spent hours discussing their dreams for the future, where they wanted to live, how they'd raise children, and what kind of love they wanted to nurture every day. Joe had a way of making the ordinary feel extraordinary. He found beauty in the small things, a shared cup of coffee in the morning, the quiet of the evening as they read together, and the laughter that filled their home when they worked on simple projects like planting flowers or organizing bookshelves. Anita learned that love wasn't about the grand moments. It was about those little shared experiences, the quiet decisions to stay, the patience to grow, and the kindness to build a life together. A few months later, Anita stood in front of the mirror, adjusting her wedding dress. She felt a mix of excitement and calm. The day had finally come. The day she would marry Joe the teacher. The man who had patiently shown her that love didn't have to be rushed or perfect to be real. The wedding was simple, just like their love. It was held at a small chapel by the sea, surrounded by close friends and family. The sun was setting, casting a warm golden light over everything, as Anita walked down the aisle, her heart full. Joe stood at the altar, his eyes soft with emotion. When they exchanged vows, Anita couldn't help but smile. There were no fireworks, no extravagant promises. Just two people, choosing each other for a lifetime. I vow to be your partner in every sense, Joe said, his voice steady. To stand beside you in joy and in hardship. To grow with you, and never stop learning from you. Anita's voice trembled as she responded. I vow to love you, even when things are quiet, even when life feels ordinary. I promise to build with you, to support you, and to create a home where we can always be ourselves. When the ceremony ended, and they shared their first kiss as husband and wife, Anita realized something profound. She had found what she had been searching for all along. Not perfection. Not fireworks. But something far more beautiful. A real, lasting love. Married life started in the same simple way it had been before. The days were filled with routine, Joe waking up early to prepare for his classes, Anita spending time on her writing projects, and evenings spent in quiet companionship. They didn't need to do anything extravagant to feel fulfilled. It was in the little things, cooking dinner together, taking long walks after the rain, and talking late into the night about their dreams, their worries, and everything. Anita realized that true happiness wasn't found in the rush of excitement or the chase of fleeting moments. It was found in the calm, in the knowing that you were building something together, slowly, steadily, and with intention. Every night, as they sat on their balcony watching the stars, she'd rest her head on Joe's shoulder, feeling the warmth of his presence. She knew, without a doubt, that this was where she was meant to be. A year after their wedding, Anita and Joe had settled into their new routine. They had moved into a cozy house on the outskirts of the city, a peaceful place where they could grow their roots. It wasn't big or grand, but it was theirs. Together, they planted a garden, picked out furniture that made them feel at home, and decorated the walls with photos from their travels. They had learned to balance their differences. Anita, with her passion for creative freedom, and Joe, with his methodical approach to life. But rather than pulling them apart, it had drawn them closer. They complemented each other in ways that made sense. One evening, as they walked in the garden, Joe turned to her and said, I've been thinking about something. Anita looked up, wiping the sweat from her brow. What's that? I want to start a family, Joe said, his voice calm but certain. I think we are ready. I think it's time to take this next step together. Anita smiled, her heart swelling with warmth. They hadn't spoken much about it before, but she realized that deep down, she had always known that they were ready. This life they were building, it was only going to grow. Together. The conversation about starting a family sparked something in Anita. She had always imagined herself as a mother, but it wasn't until Joe spoke those words that she realized how much she had been waiting for this moment. She knew that raising a child together wouldn't be easy, but it was a step towards something even more meaningful. For the next few months, they talked about their vision for the future, how they would balance careers with parenthood, the kind of values they wanted to pass on to their children, and the home they hoped to create. Joe, always the patient one, reassured Anita whenever she worried about the unknowns. He reminded her that whatever came their way, they would face it as a team. It was late one evening, as they were lying on the couch together, that Anita realized how far they had come. The woman who had once been uncertain about love was now ready to build a family with the man who had shown her what true love really meant. Months passed, and Anita's excitement about becoming a mother grew. They had already started preparing the nursery, picking out soft colors for the walls and choosing baby names they both loved. But life had a funny way of surprising them when they least expected it. One evening, Anita felt an unfamiliar flutter in her stomach. She brushed it off as nothing, but the feeling didn't go away. The next morning, she took a pregnancy test. When the result came back positive, she could hardly believe it. She stood in the bathroom, staring at the test in her hand, her heart racing. She knew she should tell Joe immediately, but she wanted to savor this moment first, to let it settle in. After everything they had been through, this was the next chapter of their story, something they had dreamed of together. That evening, when Joe came home, Anita could barely hide her excitement. Joe, she said, a wide smile on her face. I have a surprise for you. Joe raised an eyebrow. What is it? Anita handed him the test, and he stared at it for a moment, then looked up at her in disbelief. His face broke into a huge smile, and he pulled her into a tight embrace. "We are going to be parents," he whispered, his voice full of awe. Anita nodded, her eyes sparkling with joy. They had worked so hard for this moment, and now it was real. The future they had imagined together was finally unfolding before them. The months that followed were a whirlwind of excitement and anticipation. Joe and Anita couldn't stop talking about the future, the nursery, the baby's arrival, and how their lives were about to change in ways they couldn't fully comprehend. Anita reveled in the little things, the way her body was changing, the way Joe was always there for her, the way they both eagerly read every baby book they could get their hands on. The joy was palpable, but so was the nervousness. Neither of them had ever done this before. They didn't know exactly what to expect, but they knew they would be in it together. Joe, ever the calm one, took on the role of the protective partner. He made sure Anita had everything she needed, from the perfect pillow for her growing belly to late-night snacks. He was always there to listen to her fears, hold her hand, and reassure her that everything would be okay. Together, he always said, "We can handle anything." And for Anita, that was the reassurance she needed. Together, they were stronger. It was a rainy afternoon when Anita's water broke. She had been feeling unusually calm, but when the contraction started, reality hit. Joe was immediately by her side, calm and steady, helping her breathe through each wave of pain. He had taken all the prenatal classes, read all the books, and was ready for this moment. The hospital seemed like a blur as they moved through the steps. Anita's mind raced, but Joe's steady presence helped her focus. He held her hand the entire time, whispering words of encouragement between every contraction. "You're doing great," he said, his voice soft but firm. Hours passed, and just as Anita thought she couldn't go on, it happened. Their baby was born, a beautiful little girl, with soft dark curls and a tiny hand that gripped Anita's finger as if she already knew she was home. Joe looked at Anita, his eyes filled with emotion. "We did it," he said quietly, and for the first time in hours, Anita could relax, knowing that this was just the beginning of their new adventure. As they held their daughter, together for the first time as a family, Anita realized something profound. This was the love she had been searching for all along, not just the love between her and Joe, but the love they would share with their child, the love that would bind them through every challenge, every joy, and every new beginning. The first few weeks with their newborn daughter were a blur of sleepless nights and endless diaper changes, but in the midst of it all, Anita found herself falling deeper in love with Joe. Watching him cradle their daughter, speak softly to her, and comfort her in the middle of the night was a reminder of how far they had come, how much they had grown together. Joe had always been the steady, dependable one. But now, seeing him as a father, Anita saw a different side of him, gentle, tender, and full of love. Every time their daughter could or smiled, Joe would beam, his eyes full of wonder. Anita, on the other hand, found herself adjusting to the role of mother. There were moments when the exhaustion hit hard, and she wondered if she was doing enough. But Joe was always there, offering support without hesitation. Whether it was taking over during late-night feedings or simply reminding her that she was doing a great job, his presence was a constant source of reassurance. They learned how to be parents together, slowly figuring out their routines, their limits, and what worked best for their family. Some days were harder than others, but through it all, they knew that they had each other. And that was enough. As their daughter grew, so did their understanding of what it meant to be a family. The late nights turned into morning giggles, the overwhelming exhaustion became moments of joy, and the once quiet evenings were now filled with the sounds of their daughter's laughter. Joe continued teaching, but now his lessons included the lessons of fatherhood. He took on more responsibilities at home, and Anita returned to her creative projects when she could, cherishing the quiet moments when her daughter would nap in her arms. One afternoon, as they sat in the living room, Joe looked over at Anita, their daughter safely nestled in her lap, and said, "You know, we've built something beautiful here." Anita smiled, her heart full. "I think we have, too." They weren't perfect. They still had their challenges, their moments of doubt, and their struggles, but they were together. And that was the foundation they had built, one step at a time. As they looked at their daughter, who had just learned to say Mama and Dada, they realized that their journey was only just beginning. There were many more milestones ahead, but for the first time in a long time, Anita felt fully at peace. Her heart knew that she had found her home, her family. As their daughter, Grace, grew older, so did the dynamics of their home. The once quiet house was now filled with the sounds of little footsteps, playful giggles, and toys scattered all over. Every day was an adventure, full of learning and growth for both Anita and Joe. They had become parents in the truest sense, not by the perfection of their methods but by their willingness to grow with their child. Joe had a way of making the mundane seem magical. Whether it was a trip to the grocery store, a walk in the park, or bedtime stories, he brought a sense of wonder to it all. Anita, with her natural creativity, began to see the world through Grace's eyes. Everything was new, exciting, and full of possibility. But it wasn't all easy. They faced the challenges of juggling careers with parenting, the exhaustion that came with sleepless nights, and the occasional doubts about whether they were doing everything right. There were moments when Anita felt overwhelmed, questioning whether she could manage it all. But Joe was always there, with a steady hand and a kind word. "We're in this together," he'd say, a reminder that they were partners in this journey, not just parents, but a team. After several months of adjusting to life with a toddler, Anita began to realize the importance of balance. As a mother, it was easy to lose herself in the needs of her family, forgetting about her own aspirations, creativity, and sense of self. But she was determined not to lose sight of who she was beyond being a wife and mother. She started setting aside time for her writing again, carving out small moments to reconnect with herself. Joe, ever supportive, encouraged her to pursue her passions. He knew how much her creativity meant to her, and he made sure she had the space to nurture it. Their relationship, too, had evolved. There were still moments of intimacy, though they were now wrapped in the comfort of shared responsibilities and the deep understanding that came with years of partnership. They had learned to communicate in a way that felt natural and real, not always perfect, but always honest. As Grace grew, so did their understanding of what it meant to be a family. Joe and Anita often talked about their hopes for her future, the kind of life they wanted to give her, and the values they wanted to instill. It was a journey they would continue to walk together, one step at a time, building the life they had always dreamed of. Parenthood wasn't always as seamless as it seemed. As Grace entered her toddler years, the challenges grew. Tantrums, sleepless nights, and the constant need for attention began to wear on both Anita and Joe. They often found themselves exhausted, questioning whether they were doing enough or if they were even doing it right. One evening, after another long day of dealing with Grace's tantrums, Anita and Joe sat down on the couch, silent for a while. Grace had finally drifted off to sleep, but the weight of the day lingered. "I feel like we are failing sometimes," Anita admitted quietly, her voice tinged with guilt. "She's so strong-willed, and I'm not sure how to handle it all." Joe took her hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. "We are not failing. We are just learning. Every day is a new lesson." He pulled her close, kissing her forehead. "We are doing the best we can. That's all that matters." Anita smiled, feeling the comfort of his words. Parenthood was tough, but in those moments of vulnerability, they reminded each other that they weren't alone. They were a team, and together, they could handle whatever challenges came their way. Amid the hustle and bustle of raising a child, Anita and Joe made a conscious effort to keep their connection strong. They knew that if they didn't nurture their relationship, they would lose sight of the very foundation that held their family together. One weekend, after a particularly challenging week, they decided to go out for a quiet dinner. It had been ages since they had been able to do something just for themselves, without Grace, without distractions, just the two of them. The moment they walked into the restaurant, Anita felt a sense of relief. The soft lighting, the calm atmosphere, and the absence of the usual chaos allowed them to relax for the first time in a long while. They talked, really talked, about everything, memories from their early days together, their hopes for the future, and even the silly things that made them laugh. As they shared a dessert and laughed at old jokes, Anita realized something profound. They had grown so much as individuals and as parents, but they had never lost sight of who they were as a couple. There were still sparks between them, even after everything they had been through. "I miss this," Joe said, his voice soft as he reached for her hand. Anita smiled, squeezing his hand in return. "Me too. Let's not forget to do this more often." It was in these moments, away from the everyday demands of life, that they found each other again, the couple who had first fallen in love. And with that renewed connection, they knew they could handle whatever came next. As Grace grew older, Anita began to realize how much she had changed since becoming a mother. Her life had become centered around family, and she wouldn't have it any other way. But she also felt the pull of the dreams she had put on hold. The writing she loved, the passions she once pursued with ease, those pieces of herself that had been sidelined for a while were starting to resurface. One afternoon, as Grace was at school, Anita sat at her desk, a blank notebook before her. She picked up her pen and began to write. Words flowed easily, as if they had always been there, waiting for her to return. It felt like coming home to a part of herself she had nearly forgotten. She was determined to make time for her creative pursuits, even if it meant finding small moments in the chaos of daily life. Joe noticed the change in her immediately. He saw the spark in her eyes when she shared her latest writing or the excitement in her voice when she discussed ideas for a new project. He encouraged her every step of the way, reminding her that she didn't have to choose between being a great mother and following her dreams. He believed in her, and that belief gave her the confidence to pursue her passions again. "I'm proud of you," Joe told her one evening after she'd spent hours writing. "You're amazing." Anita smiled, feeling a warmth in her heart. "Thank you. I didn't know how much I missed this." Together, they found a way to balance both their family life and their individual aspirations. For Anita, rediscovering her love for writing brought a new sense of fulfillment and peace. It was a reminder that it was okay to take time for herself, to nurture the parts of her that weren't just about being a wife or a mother. A few years later, as Grace approached her 5th birthday, Anita and Joe began to think about expanding their family. They had always dreamed of having more than one child, and the time felt right to take that step. This time, the process felt different. They weren't as anxious or unsure as they had been with Grace. They knew what to expect, and more importantly, they knew they could handle whatever came their way, as long as they did it together. It didn't take long for them to find out they were expecting again. This time, though, they didn't want to make the same mistake they had the first time around by rushing into everything. They took their time, savoring the moments of anticipation. Grace was thrilled at the idea of becoming a big sister, and she began talking to the baby every night, saying goodnight to the growing bump in Anita's belly. The pregnancy was smooth, and while the excitement never really wore off, it was in the little moments, like Grace's excitement when she'd feel the baby kick, that made it all feel even more special. Joe, of course, was his usual calm, steady self, always there to support Anita in any way she needed. This time, they didn't feel the weight of uncertainty. They felt ready for whatever their expanding family would bring, knowing that they had already built a strong foundation of love, trust, and mutual support. The day finally came, and just like the first time, Anita's nerves kicked in, but this time, she felt more confident. She had already faced the challenges of motherhood with Grace, and while every child was different, she knew she had the love and support she needed. Joe, as always, was her rock, his calm demeanor helping her through every step of the process. This time, though, they were blessed with a son, strong and healthy, with a full head of dark hair and a calm nature that seemed to mirror Joe's. They named him Elijah, a name full of strength and hope, just as they hoped he would be. As Anita held Elijah in her arms for the first time, she was filled with an overwhelming sense of love, peace, and gratitude. There was something magical about bringing new life into the world. A new chapter of their family's story was beginning. Grace was overjoyed, as expected. She couldn't wait to meet her little brother and started planning how she would help take care of him, making sure he would grow up surrounded by love and attention. Her excitement was contagious, and Anita and Joe couldn't help but smile at how their little family was expanding, ready to embark on this new journey together. The days that followed were full of joy and adjustment, but for Anita and Joe, it felt like everything had fallen perfectly into place. Their family, once just the two of them, now felt complete. With the arrival of Elijah, their life became even busier than before. But this time, Anita and Joe had a rhythm. They balanced the needs of their newborn with Grace's growing independence, managing work, home life, and personal dreams with more ease than ever. Anita found that, with 2 children, time for herself became even more precious. She had to be more intentional about carving out moments to write, but she did it. It wasn't always easy, but every time she sat down to write, it felt like a small victory, a reminder that she could still nurture her creative side, even while nurturing her family. Joe, too, found new ways to juggle his career with fatherhood. As always, he took the lead in making sure the household ran smoothly. He supported Anita's creative pursuits, helped with the kids, and continued to be the steady, reliable partner she had always known him to be. Their teamwork was stronger than ever. They would often sit together after the kids were asleep, sharing the quiet moments they cherished, reflecting on the beauty of their family and the life they had built. Their love for each other had deepened, not just because of the challenges they had faced, but because of how they had grown together through it all. Anita looked at Joe one evening, as they sipped tea together, and said, "We've really built something beautiful, haven't we?" Joe smiled, his eyes warm. "Yeah, we have. And it's just getting started." The years flew by quickly, and with each passing day, Anita and Joe found themselves embracing new phases of life. Grace was now in elementary school, a bright and confident girl who was starting to show her own interests and talents. Elijah, too, was growing into a curious and energetic toddler, his laughter echoing through the house. Anita and Joe had reached a point in their lives where the days of constant chaos were slowly evolving into a more predictable routine. But with this change came a new set of challenges. Grace was starting to develop her own opinions, and her independence, while a joy to watch, sometimes made things a little more complicated. Elijah, too, was testing boundaries, as toddlers tend to do, and it felt like they were in a new season of parenting, one that was both exciting and a bit overwhelming at times. But as always, Anita and Joe leaned on each other. They knew that the key to navigating this stage was to communicate openly, to be flexible, and to continue learning and growing together. "Parenting is like a never-ending cycle of change," Anita said one evening as she looked at Joe, both of them sitting on the couch after the kids had gone to bed. "Every stage brings new challenges, but also new rewards." Joe nodded, a smile tugging at his lips. "And we get better at handling them even when it doesn't feel like it. We've been through so much already, and we've always made it work." It was true. They had faced so many milestones together, and every time they hit a new challenge, they did so as a team. They didn't always have the answers, but they knew that whatever came their way, they could face it together. Chapter 42, Rediscovering Joy. As Grace and Elijah grew older, Anita and Joe began to realize just how much they had sacrificed for their children. Not in a negative way, but in the sense that the years of focusing on family had meant putting their own desires and dreams on the back burner. One evening, after dinner, Joe turned to Anita with a thoughtful expression. I think it's time we do something just for us again, he said. We've spent so much time focusing on the kids, which is amazing, but I think we need to rediscover the things that make us happy individually and together. Anita paused, realizing that he was right. She had become so immersed in her role as a mother and wife that she hadn't made much time for herself lately. She had neglected the small things that once brought her joy, the moments of quiet reflection, the thrill of writing, and even simple pleasures like taking a walk alone. "What do you have in mind?" she asked, a smile tugging at her lips. Joe's eyes sparkled with excitement. "A weekend away. Just the two of us. No kids, no distractions. Just time to reconnect and recharge." Anita's heart swelled. She realized how much she had missed their quiet moments together, the spontaneous adventures, the connection they had shared before children. They both needed time to recharge, to rediscover each other beyond the roles of parent and partner. That weekend, they left the kids with Grandma and spent 2 blissful days together in a cozy cabin by the lake. It was a chance to slow down, to talk, to laugh, and to remind themselves why they had fallen in love in the first place. It was more than just a getaway, it was a chance to reconnect with each other and with themselves. As Grace entered her teenage years and Elijah grew into a curious and adventurous young boy, Anita and Joe found themselves reflecting on their parenting journey. The early years of sleepless nights and endless to-do lists had faded into distant memories, replaced by the growing sense of independence in their children. But while their lives had become quieter in some ways, they also knew that the work of parenting wasn't over, it had simply shifted. Grace, now in high school, was beginning to explore her own interests and passions. She had become a confident, strong young woman, but there were still moments when she needed guidance. Anita and Joe found themselves navigating the tricky balance of giving her the space she needed while still being there for her when she asked for advice or support. Elijah, still full of energy, was starting to show signs of developing a strong sense of curiosity. He loved exploring the world around him and asking questions about everything, often keeping Anita and Joe on their toes with his endless whys. Anita and Joe often found themselves amazed at how quickly their children had grown and how much they had evolved as parents. They were no longer just caregivers, they had become mentors, guides, and supporters for their children, helping them navigate the challenges of growing up. One evening, after dinner, the family gathered in the living room to share stories of their day. Grace talked about a project she was working on at school, while Elijah excitedly described a new animal he had learned about. Anita and Joe exchanged a quiet glance, feeling proud of the family they had built together. It wasn't always easy, but it had always been worth it. Through the challenges and the joys, they had stuck together, and in the process, they had formed a bond that was unbreakable. As time went on, Anita and Joe began to think more seriously about the future. They had created a stable, loving home for their children, but what about their own personal growth? Their own dreams? Anita's writing had flourished in recent years, and she had begun to publish articles and short stories. She had even started working on a novel, something she had dreamed of for years. Joe, too, was thriving in his career, gaining recognition for his work as a teacher and mentor. But despite their individual accomplishments, they still felt a yearning to grow as a couple, to take their relationship to the next level. One day, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Joe turned to Anita with a thoughtful expression. "I've been thinking," he began. "What if we start something together? Something we're both passionate about, something that combines our strengths." Anita raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What do you have in mind?" Joe smiled, his eyes full of excitement. "What if we open a space, like a community center or retreat, where people can come to learn, create, and grow? A place where we can host workshops, writing retreats, classes, and even offer support to parents and families." Anita's heart skipped a beat at the idea. It was a vision that seemed to combine everything they both loved: education, creativity, and helping others. It would be a big challenge, but she could see the potential, the impact it could have. "I love it," she said, her voice full of excitement. "Let's do it." And so, with renewed purpose and passion, Anita and Joe set their sights on building something new. The next chapter of their lives was about to unfold, one that would allow them to share their journey with others, to give back to their community, and to continue growing as individuals and as partners. Together, they had created a life full of love, growth, and possibility. And the future was wide open, waiting for them to take the next step, together. The idea of opening a community center was thrilling, but it also felt overwhelming. Anita and Joe knew that creating such a space would require careful planning, dedication, and resources. They spent countless evenings brainstorming, researching, and discussing every detail. They envisioned a place where people could gather to share ideas, learn new skills, and grow, both personally and as a community. It was more than just a business venture, it was a dream that had the potential to change lives. They reached out to friends and colleagues for advice and support, many of whom were excited about the idea. Joe's colleagues at the school were enthusiastic, offering to help with educational programs. Anita's writer friends suggested hosting writing workshops and author talks. They began gathering ideas, creating a vision board, and setting concrete goals. The first step was to find the right location. They searched for a building that would be spacious enough for workshops, classrooms, and gathering areas, but also warm and welcoming, a place where people would feel comfortable and inspired. After weeks of searching, they found the perfect spot, a charming old building that had once been a community hall. It had character, history, and potential. The moment they stepped inside, they knew it was the place. The rooms were spacious, the windows let in plenty of natural light, and the atmosphere felt inviting. It was exactly what they had envisioned. "It's perfect," Anita said, her voice full of excitement. "This is the place we've been looking for." Joe smiled, his heart full. "We can make this work." Together, they signed the lease, and the next phase of their journey began. They would need to renovate, set up programs, and build a community, but they were ready. Every day, they worked alongside each other, balancing their roles as parents, partners, and now business owners. It wasn't easy, but the sense of purpose kept them going. Renovating the building was harder than they had expected. There were countless hurdles to overcome, delays with contractors, unforeseen expenses, and the inevitable moments of doubt. But Anita and Joe were determined. They worked together, bringing their individual skills to the table. Joe's background in teaching helped with creating structured programs, while Anita's writing skills proved invaluable in crafting promotional materials and reaching out to potential instructors. Grace and Elijah were fully involved in the process as well. They would help paint walls, organize materials, and give their opinions on the design. Grace, always the creative one, suggested bright colors for the walls, and Elijah, always the problem solver, helped them come up with ways to make the space more functional. It became a family project, with everyone contributing in their own way. As the weeks passed, the community center slowly started to take shape. The walls were freshly painted, the furniture arrived, and the programs they had envisioned began to take form. They lined up workshops on everything from writing and art to parenting and career development. They wanted to create a space where anyone, no matter their background or skill level, could come and learn something new. The grand opening day finally arrived, and with it, a sense of accomplishment. The space was alive with energy, filled with people excited about the programs, eager to connect, and ready to learn. Anita and Joe stood together, looking around at what they had created, their hearts full of pride. "Look at this," Anita whispered, her voice full of emotion. "We did it." Joe smiled, pulling her close. Together. The first few months after the community center's opening were both exciting and challenging. They had no shortage of people eager to take part in the various workshops and programs. Each week brought new faces, new ideas, and new stories. The space quickly became a hub of creativity, learning, and growth. Grace and Elijah often visited after school, spending time in the center's library or participating in some of the activities. Grace even volunteered to help organize the children's art classes, bringing her love for creativity into the mix. Elijah, still young but eager to be involved, would help clean up and hand out flyers. They both felt proud to be part of something that made a real difference in their community. Anita found immense joy in watching the center come to life. She had always dreamed of making a positive impact through her writing, but this was something tangible. She had started teaching a few writing workshops herself, connecting with people from all walks of life who wanted to share their stories. She was amazed at the variety of voices and perspectives, and how everyone's experiences added something unique to the center's growing energy. Joe, too, found fulfillment in his role. As a former teacher, he loved interacting with the students and teaching new skills. He had developed a program for young adults who were struggling to find direction in life, helping them explore career options and personal development. The feedback was overwhelmingly positive, and Joe knew he was making a difference. The success of the community center wasn't just about the programs or the workshops. It was about the sense of connection it fostered. People who had never met before were friendships, collaborating, and learning from each other. The center had become a place where people felt supported, encouraged, and empowered. One evening, as the sun set and the center quieted down after a busy day, Anita and Joe shared a moment together, sitting on the steps outside. "It's more than I ever imagined," Anita said, looking around at the building that had become so much more than just a project. Joe smiled, his arm around her shoulder. "It's more than we ever imagined." They both knew that this was just the beginning. There was still so much more to do, so many more people to reach, but for now, they allowed themselves to savor the success of their hard work and the joy of seeing their dream come to life. As the months went on, the community center continued to grow and evolve. New workshops were introduced, and more people came through the doors, eager to learn, share, and grow. Anita and Joe realized that the center had become more than just a business venture. It was a symbol of what could happen when people came together to support one another. They had created something powerful, a space where people could connect, be vulnerable, and grow without judgment. The programs they offered weren't just educational, they were transformative. People were changing their careers, starting new ventures, and finding their voices. The center was giving them the tools they needed to better their lives. One afternoon, an older woman named Mrs. Agnes came to the center for a writing workshop. She had been hesitant at first, unsure of whether she would fit in or be able to write. But after attending a few sessions, she began to open up. She shared stories from her childhood, her experiences of raising children, and the lessons she had learned over the years. The group listened intently, and by the end of the session, Mrs. Agnes was beaming with pride. She had found her voice and was ready to share it with the world. It was moments like this that made all the hard work worthwhile. Anita often found herself moved by the courage of people who were stepping out of their comfort zones to pursue something new. The center had become a space where everyone, no matter their age or background, could find a sense of belonging. One evening, after a particularly inspiring workshop, Joe and Anita sat in the quiet of the empty center, reflecting on all they had achieved. "We've done something special here," Anita said softly. "We've created a place where people can transform." Joe nodded, his gaze on the bustling community outside the window. "And it's not just about the workshops or the programs. It's about the people. It's about the connections we're helping them build." Anita smiled, taking his hand. "We've built more than just a center. We've built a family." As time passed, the impact of the community center began to ripple outward, touching more lives than Anita and Joe had ever anticipated. Word spread, not just locally, but to surrounding towns and neighborhoods. People were hearing about the center's programs, and many traveled long distances to be a part of it. The workshops were thriving, but so were the unexpected opportunities that arose from the center's success. One day, a local newspaper reached out to Anita and Joe for an interview. The reporter was fascinated by the community center's mission and the ways it had brought people together. She wanted to share their story with a wider audience. The article was published a week later, and soon after, the center was inundated with phone calls from individuals, organizations, and even businesses that wanted to collaborate. Some were interested in offering funding for new programs, others wanted to host events that would further promote the center's message of community and personal growth. Anita and Joe were initially overwhelmed by the attention, but they also saw it as a sign that they were on the right path. The center had become a beacon of hope for many, a place where people could come to heal, learn, and grow. They had created something sustainable, something that would outlast them. Grace, now in her senior year of high school, had begun to volunteer more, assisting in organizing community outreach programs. She was beginning to find her own purpose in the center, and Anita couldn't have been prouder of how she was shaping up into a confident, empathetic young adult. Even Elijah, though still young, had taken on more responsibility. He loved the sense of belonging he felt every time he helped out, from organizing books in the library to assisting with setting up the space for events. Joe and Anita smiled every time they saw their children becoming more engaged, understanding the importance of giving back and being part of something bigger than themselves. Chapter 50: A Legacy of Love. The center had become more than just a physical space, it was a testament to the vision Anita and Joe had worked so hard to bring to life. It wasn't just about providing workshops and classes. It was about creating a legacy of love, support, and empowerment. Joe often found himself reflecting on the journey they had taken. They had gone from the uncertainty of starting a family to finding their calling in creating something that touched lives. It had been a roller coaster of highs and lows, but through it all, their love for each other had been the constant that kept them grounded. One afternoon, as they walked through the community center together, Joe squeezed Anita's hand. "Can you believe how far we've come?" he asked. Anita smiled, a soft, contented smile. "No. But every step, every challenge, it was worth it." They watched as people entered the building, some greeting them with hugs, others with gratitude in their eyes. Anita felt her heart swell with pride. She and Joe had created something lasting, something that would continue to affect generations to come. "Do you ever wonder what the future holds?" Anita asked, as they stood by the entrance, watching the community come alive. Joe paused, thinking for a moment. "I used to. But now, I think the future is in the hands of all these people. The impact we've made, it's just the beginning." They stood there, side by side, feeling the pulse of the community around them. It was a quiet moment of reflection, but it was also a powerful one. They had started with a dream and had turned it into something bigger than they could have imagined. A dream built on love, trust, and the desire to help others. As they walked back through the center, hand in hand, they knew that this was just the beginning of an even greater journey. Together, they had created a legacy, one that would live on long after they were gone. As the community center flourished, Anita and Joe began to realize that they were entering a new phase in their lives. They had created something remarkable, and it had grown beyond what they had initially imagined. The center was now an integral part of the community, and it felt as if their work was far from finished. The couple began to shift their focus towards expanding their outreach efforts. They started hosting regional events, bringing people together from neighboring towns and cities. Anita and Joe wanted the message of community, support, and empowerment to reach as many people as possible. They began planning retreats and conferences, where like-minded individuals could come together to learn, grow, and share their experiences. Grace, now applying to colleges, had taken on a leadership role in the center, helping to mentor younger volunteers and develop new programs. She had found a way to combine her passion for art with the center's mission, offering creative workshops that were a huge hit. Anita and Joe were amazed at how far their daughter had come, watching her evolve from a young girl into a young woman with her own vision and purpose. Elijah, though younger, had become an essential part of the center's daily operations. His infectious energy and eagerness to help made him a favorite among the volunteers. Joe and Anita often joked that they had a third staff member in their son. The community center was truly a family affair, and with every step forward, Anita and Joe's sense of fulfillment deepened. They realized that their work wasn't just about the center, it was about building a network of support and creating a space where people felt seen and heard. As the years went by, the couple began to think about the future of the center beyond their involvement. They knew that they couldn't run the community center forever, and they wanted to ensure that it would continue to thrive after they stepped back. One evening, as they sat together in the center's cozy lounge area, Anita turned to Joe with a thoughtful expression. "What do you think it will look like when we're no longer as hands-on with the center?" she asked. Joe looked around the room, filled with laughter and activity. He could see the future of the center clearly now, one where the programs and relationships they had built would continue to grow, led by the next generation. "I think we've already built a strong foundation," Joe said. "Grace and Elijah have been involved from the start, and I can see them taking leadership roles here. The center will be in good hands. They have the same love for this place that we do." Anita smiled, her heart swelling with pride. "I'm so proud of them. I've seen them grow so much in the last few years. It feels like they're ready to carry the torch when the time comes." Joe nodded, his eyes softening. "We've raised them well. And this center, it's more than just a project. It's a legacy. They'll continue to build on it, just like we did." The conversation lingered in the air, filled with the quiet acknowledgement that their time was slowly shifting. They didn't know exactly when it would happen, but they both felt confident that the center would continue to thrive in the hands of the people they loved. It wasn't about stepping away completely, it was about allowing new voices, new ideas, and fresh energy to take the reins. They had planted the seeds, and now it was time to let the garden grow. As the evening wore on, they stood up, hand in hand, and looked around the center one last time. The laughter and conversations continued, but for a brief moment, it felt as though the world had paused. They had built something lasting, something that would endure. And the future felt bright, filled with endless possibilities. "We've done it, haven't we?" Anita whispered, her voice full of contentment. Joe squeezed her hand. "Yes, we have." And as they left the center that night, they knew the journey was far from over. It was just the beginning of a new chapter, one where the legacy of love, growth, and community would continue to flourish for generations to come. The community center was buzzing with life as always, but now, something new was taking root. Anita and Joe had spent the past several months mentoring Grace and Elijah, teaching them not just about running a business, but about the heart and soul of the center. It wasn't about profit, it was about purpose. Grace, who had recently finished her first year of college, returned home for the summer and immediately began working alongside her parents, getting more involved in the day-to-day operations of the center. She was full of fresh ideas and energy, and her parents could see how her experiences at college had shaped her into a young woman who was passionate about social change and community empowerment. Elijah, now in his teens, had become more confident and responsible. He was organizing events and workshops with his parents, helping Grace develop new youth programs, and becoming increasingly involved in outreach efforts. His love for connecting people and helping others was contagious. It was clear that he was shaping up to be a future leader of the center, much like his parents had been. One evening, as Anita and Joe sat in the lounge with Grace and Elijah, they couldn't help but smile. They were so proud of their children, their willingness to take on new challenges, their heart for service, and their desire to make the center even better than before. "You know, this place feels more like a family than a business sometimes," Grace remarked, her eyes scanning the familiar faces around them. Anita nodded, her gaze soft. "It's because it's built on love. It's not just about the programs or the workshops. It's about what happens when people come together, when they care about each other. Joe chuckled. And we've got two very important members of the family who are ready to take it even further. Grace and Elijah exchanged a knowing look, their shared vision evident in the way they communicated without words. They were ready. And the future, while uncertain, felt incredibly bright. As the years went by, the time came for Anita and Joe to make a decision about the center's future. While they would always be a part of it, they knew it was time to pass the baton to the next generation. It wasn't an easy decision. They had poured their hearts and souls into the center for so long, and the idea of stepping back felt daunting. But they also knew that they had taught Grace and Elijah everything they needed to know, and more. It was their turn now to lead, and Anita and Joe trusted them wholeheartedly. The transition was gradual. Joe and Anita began to step back from the daily operations, while Grace and Elijah took on more responsibility. They started running meetings, organizing events, and making decisions that would shape the center's future. Anita and Joe were there to offer guidance, but they stepped into more of an advisory role, watching as their children put their own stamp on the center. One afternoon, as the family sat together in the community center, Joe turned to Grace and Elijah. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice both proud and full of anticipation. Grace smiled, her eyes sparkling. "I think we're as ready as we'll ever be." Elijah nodded. "We've learned a lot from you too, and we've got big plans for the future. But we're not doing this alone. We've got the whole community with us." Anita reached across the table, taking her children's hands in hers. "You have all the love, knowledge, and support you need. The center is in good hands." With that, they made the final shift. Grace and Elijah assumed leadership of the community center, carrying forward the values and principles that had been established from the very beginning. Anita and Joe, while still present and involved, watched from the sidelines as their children took the reins and continued to build upon the legacy they had created. The community center grew stronger than ever, reaching more people, hosting more workshops, and impacting more lives. It became a true reflection of the next generation's vision and passion, a place where love, growth, and connection flourished. And though Anita and Joe were no longer running the day-to-day operations, they couldn't help but feel an overwhelming sense of pride every time they walked through the center's doors. Their dream had lived on, and they knew that it would continue to grow for many years to come. As Grace and Elijah took the lead at the community center, the environment shifted, but the core values remained unchanged. The center was growing, not just in size but in impact. New faces filled the workshops, and the outreach programs were reaching people who had never dreamed of such opportunities. The excitement in the air was palpable, as if the very walls of the center were alive with possibility. Grace had begun introducing new initiatives. She was particularly passionate about expanding the creative arts programs, offering classes in photography, music, and poetry. She worked closely with local artists to bring diverse perspectives into the space. Grace, who had once been a teenager unsure of her place in the world, now stood confidently at the forefront of the center. Her leadership was not about authority, it was about inspiration. She encouraged her team to dream big and pursue initiatives that would make the center even more impactful. Under her guidance, they introduced new mental health support groups, youth entrepreneurship programs, and educational workshops on sustainability. Elijah, equally passionate, had taken on more responsibility in organizing larger community events. His charm and ability to connect with people made him a natural networker, and he had secured several grants and sponsorships that helped the center expand its outreach. He was also deeply committed to engaging with local schools, encouraging students to get involved and volunteer at the center. Anita and Joe still visited the center frequently, often with an encouraging word for their children or a new idea to brainstorm. But more and more, they found themselves stepping back, allowing Grace and Elijah to fully lead the center with their own vision. Watching their children grow into the leaders they had hoped they would become filled them with an immense sense of pride. It was clear that the next generation was carrying the torch with even more passion and creativity. One evening, as Anita and Joe sat at home reflecting on the years gone by, Anita turned to Joe with a smile. "Can you believe it, Joe? The center has become everything we dreamed of and more. And we're just getting started." Joe nodded, his eyes warm with pride. "It feels like a lifetime ago when we started, doesn't it? But it's been worth every moment. We've given our children a strong foundation to build upon, and I have no doubt they'll take it even further." Anita looked out the window, her thoughts drifting to the countless people whose lives had been touched by the center. "Our work will live on, even after we are gone. That's what really matters." Joe reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "Yes, it will. And it's more than just a place. It's a community, a family. And that's the most important legacy we could leave behind." Chapter 60, A Celebration of the Journey. As the anniversary of the community center's opening drew near, Grace and Elijah decided to host a special celebration to honor the journey that had brought them all to this point. It was not just a celebration of the center's growth but of the people who had made it possible. The evening was filled with gratitude, laughter, and heartfelt speeches. Joe and Anita were invited to speak at the event, and as they stood before the gathered crowd, it was impossible for them to ignore the deep sense of fulfillment and joy that filled their hearts. The journey had been long, but it had been worth it. Anita began the speech, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "When we first started this center, we didn't know exactly what we were doing. We just knew that we wanted to create something that would bring people together. We didn't know how many lives would be touched, how many dreams would be sparked, and how many hearts would be healed. But now, standing here today, we can say that we did it." Joe continued, his voice warm and full of love. "And we couldn't have done it without the support of every single one of you. This center is a reflection of all of us, the people who believed in it from the start and the people who continue to pour their energy, passion, and love into it. It's not just a building. It's a family. And that's what makes it so special." The crowd applauded, but it was more than just applause. It was a celebration of the collective effort, the sense of community that had made the center thrive. It was a moment of reflection on everything that had been achieved and a moment of anticipation for everything still to come. Later that evening, as the sun set and the stars began to twinkle above the community center, Grace, Elijah, Joe, and Anita stood together, gazing out at the crowd that had gathered to celebrate. It was a family in every sense of the word, a family bound by shared values, dreams, and the belief that together, they could make the world a better place. And as they clinked their glasses, Anita felt a deep sense of peace wash over her. The journey had been long, but it was one worth taking. And in this moment, she knew that the center, their legacy, and the love that had fueled it all would continue to grow, reaching more people and making a difference for generations to come. As the seasons passed, Grace and Elijah's leadership at the community center continued to flourish. The center had become more than just a hub for personal development, it was now a beacon of hope for those in need. With their creativity and passion, Grace and Elijah expanded the center's services, reaching more individuals and families in the area. Grace's initiatives had drawn the attention of local media and philanthropists. Her creative arts programs were not only transforming lives but were beginning to inspire similar projects in neighboring communities. Her team had begun collaborating with schools, giving students the chance to explore their talents in the arts while learning how to use their creative expression to make a positive impact on the world around them. Elijah, with his business-minded approach, had grown the center's visibility, bringing in grants and corporate sponsorships. He'd spearheaded efforts to create new community partnerships, involving local businesses in the center's outreach programs. This expanded the center's influence, giving them the resources needed to introduce a scholarship fund for low-income youth, providing them with the opportunity to attend professional workshops and pursue their passions. Anita and Joe, while still offering support when needed, had embraced their new roles as elder statespeople of the center. They were involved in mentoring the younger generation of volunteers, offering guidance and wisdom when asked, but they also knew it was time for Grace and Elijah to take the lead. The day-to-day operations were now fully in their hands, and the center's success under their leadership spoke for itself. One day, as the center prepared to launch a new youth entrepreneurship program, Grace approached her parents, gratitude shining in her eyes. "Mom, Dad," she said, "I want to thank you for everything you've done, for building this place, for giving me and Elijah the foundation to take it further. We are ready. But we wouldn't be here without your love and vision." Joe smiled, his pride in his children evident. "You two are the ones making it happen now. We are just here to cheer you on." Anita added, "And we always will. We've seen your passion and commitment, and we know the center is in the best hands possible. Just remember, our work was never about us. It was about the people we could help. And you've both already done that." Grace and Elijah exchanged a look, their shared understanding of the center's mission as clear as ever. They had learned from the best, and now, it was their turn to continue the work with the same love and dedication their parents had shown. With the community center in capable hands, Anita and Joe felt an immense sense of fulfillment as they watched Grace and Elijah thrive in their roles. But while they were content with their decision to step back, they also knew that their work wasn't quite over. There were still moments to share, still wisdom to impart, and still a legacy to nurture. Joe, now a grandfather, had taken up gardening as a new hobby. It was a quiet, peaceful activity, one that allowed him to reflect on the many years spent building something bigger than himself. As he worked in the garden, he often thought about the countless seeds they had planted over the years, seeds of hope, community, and change. He was proud of the garden they had nurtured together, but he knew the real work had been in the people, the families, the young leaders, and the volunteers who made the center what it was today. Anita had taken up a new course, environmental sustainability. She began organizing community cleanup events, teaching people how to recycle and take care of the planet. She had always believed that the center's influence should extend beyond the walls, and she felt that now was the time to share that message with others. Their children, too, had grown in ways that even they couldn't have predicted. Grace had recently become a published author, writing a book about her experiences running the community center and how people could use their creative talents to spark change. She spoke regularly at conferences, inspiring others to create similar programs in their own communities. Elijah had started his own consulting business, helping other nonprofits expand their outreach and create sustainable programs. As the years went on, the center continued to thrive under Grace and Elijah's leadership. The new programs they'd introduced were successful, and more people were being touched by the center's efforts. Volunteers came from far and wide, and partnerships with larger organizations were forming. The vision Anita and Joe had set out to create had grown beyond anything they had imagined. One evening, as they sat together on the porch of their home, watching the sunset, Anita turned to Joe with a content smile. "We did it, Joe. We really did it." Joe squeezed her hand, his heart full. "Yes, we did. And it's still going, still growing. We've created something that will keep giving, even when we're gone. That's the real reward." And so, with peace in their hearts and the legacy of the community center family in place, Anita and Joe settled into a new chapter of their lives, one filled with joy, reflection, and the knowledge that their work would continue to inspire and uplift for many generations to come. The years were kind to the family, and the center's influence spread far beyond what Anita and Joe had ever imagined. What had started as a small vision in their minds had transformed into a hub of innovation, connection, and growth, touching lives far and wide. As Grace and Elijah took on more responsibility, they had grown into the next generation of leaders, stepping forward with both confidence and humility. The center had become a staple of the community, and over time, it gained recognition from other cities. They began receiving inquiries from other towns and municipalities looking to replicate their model. Grace was invited to speak at national conferences, sharing the vision her parents had passed down and the impact it had on the community. Elijah worked tirelessly with other organizations to build partnerships and advocate for the importance of community-based programs. While the center had been their flagship project, Grace and Elijah had also become increasingly involved in creating new initiatives that reflected their passions. Grace launched a mentorship program for young women in the arts, providing them with the tools and opportunities to succeed in industries that often overlook them. Elijah, meanwhile, was deeply invested in social justice, advocating for policy changes to improve resources for underserved communities. Their drive to make a difference had transcended the walls of the center, impacting the wider world. Anita and Joe, content with seeing the center thrive under the leadership of their children, had become more focused on their personal journeys. They had spent more time traveling, reconnecting with old friends, and continuing to nurture the passions they developed outside the center. They visited distant lands, meeting new people and experiencing life in ways they had never expected. In every new place, they found people who were doing the same kind of work they had started so many years ago, working to build better communities, fostering love, and supporting one another. One day, during a quiet moment in their travels, Anita turned to Joe as they sat on a bench overlooking a beautiful landscape. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" Joe nodded, a thoughtful expression on his face. "We sure have. And it's been a wonderful journey. The center, our children, all of it. I couldn't be prouder." Anita smiled, her heart full. "I think the best part is knowing that it's not just us. It's everyone, the volunteers, the community, the families we've helped. They've all played a part in making it what it is today." Joe squeezed her hand. "Yes. And I know, with all my heart, that it will continue to grow and touch more lives long after we're gone." The day came when Anita and Joe, now in their later years, made a decision to fully step away from the community center. It wasn't an easy choice, but they knew that it was the right time. Grace and Elijah had taken the reins, and the center was flourishing under their leadership. The vision that Anita and Joe had set in motion had evolved, but the core values they had instilled, love, community, empowerment, remained intact. Grace and Elijah made sure to honor their parents in every step of their leadership, continuing to build on the foundation of love and connection they had inherited. The center had grown into a network of support that reached far beyond their city's borders, with chapters and sister organizations starting to form in neighboring towns and even other states. It was an organization that had truly made an impact, and its influence would be felt for generations to come. One of the most touching moments came when Grace and Elijah decided to dedicate a room within the center to Anita and Joe, naming it the Legacy Room. This room became a space for reflection and inspiration, filled with pictures, stories, and artifacts that told the journey of the center's founders. It was a place where new generations could come to learn about the importance of community, love, and the power of starting small. On the opening day of the Legacy Room, Anita and Joe were invited to cut the ribbon, surrounded by their family, friends, and the countless people whose lives had been changed by the center. As they stood together, hand in hand, looking around at the faces of the people who had gathered, Anita's heart swelled with pride. "This is it," she said softly to Joe. "This is everything we worked for." Joe nodded, his eyes filled with emotion. "And it's only just the beginning." As the ribbon was cut and the door to the Legacy Room was opened, a sense of peace washed over Anita and Joe. They had done more than create a center, they had created a movement. They had built a legacy that would endure, spreading love and support, touching lives far beyond their own. As they stepped aside, watching Grace and Elijah lead the next chapter of the journey, Anita and Joe knew one thing for certain: they had created something that would live on forever, a testament to the power of love, vision, and community. And with that, they could finally rest, content knowing that the story they had begun had grown into something far more beautiful than they could have ever imagined. Grace and Elijah had become the embodiment of their parents' vision. They worked tirelessly, continually adapting and innovating to meet the needs of their community while keeping the center's original mission intact. The community center was no longer just a place, it had become a symbol of unity, hope, and a future full of possibilities. As Grace entered her 30s, she was approached by several international organizations who wanted to collaborate with her. They were inspired by the way the center had bridged gaps between people of different backgrounds and social classes. Grace, however, remained grounded in the belief that no matter how far-reaching their influence became, the heart of their work would always be in the community. Elijah, too, had grown into a respected leader. He used his growing influence to advocate for equitable resource distribution, aiming to ensure that underserved communities had access to the same opportunities as more affluent areas. He often worked with governmental agencies to push for policy changes, always staying true to the community values his parents had instilled in him. Despite the increasing recognition and demands on their time, Grace and Elijah never lost sight of what mattered most, the people. They continued to listen, learn, and adapt, always open to new ideas and feedback. The center continued to grow, now offering a wide range of services, from education to job training, mental health resources, and even international development initiatives. As the years passed, the two began discussing ways to ensure the center's continued success long after their own time. They established an endowment fund, a foundation to help fund future projects and initiatives. The center's impact was now beginning to reach beyond the city and even beyond the country's borders. But even as Grace and Elijah built new horizons, they always remembered the importance of family. Every year, they hosted a large gathering at the center, bringing together people from all walks of life to share in their achievements, reflect on the progress made, and honor those who had been part of the journey. And every year, Anita and Joe were there, standing proudly by their side, watching their children take their place as the new generation of leaders. Chapter 66: The Eternal Flame. Many years had passed since the community center had first opened its doors, and the legacy of Anita and Joe was woven into the very fabric of the place. Though the original founders had stepped back from their hands-on roles, their presence was still felt in every corner of the building. Every program, every event, every conversation carried the imprint of their love and vision. One day, as Grace was reflecting on the center's history, she decided to create a scholarship in her parents' name. This scholarship would support young leaders who demonstrated the same drive and commitment to building stronger, more compassionate communities. The award would go to individuals who showed the potential to make a real difference in the world, just as Anita and Joe had done all those years ago. Grace stood in front of the center's community, announcing the establishment of the scholarship. As she spoke, she shared the story of her parents, their sacrifice, their vision, and their unwavering commitment to helping others. The room was filled with emotion as she spoke, and it was clear that the center's impact had touched more lives than anyone could have imagined. That evening, as the sun set and the last guests began to leave, Grace and Elijah stood at the front of the center, looking out over the building that had become a sanctuary for so many. "Do you think they would have imagined all of this?" Elijah asked, his voice soft with reverence. Grace smiled, her gaze distant as she reflected on everything that had been achieved. "I don't know if they imagined it, but they always believed it was possible. They believed in the power of community and the strength of love. And they passed that belief on to us." Elijah nodded. "And now we are passing it on to the next generation." The two stood there in silence for a moment, the weight of their parents' legacy settling over them like a warm embrace. In the years that followed, Grace and Elijah continued to lead with grace, love, and dedication. The center had become a lifeline for thousands, and its impact was undeniable. The scholarship had supported dozens of young people who had gone on to make significant contributions to society, furthering the work that Anita and Joe had started. Though they had long since stepped back from the day-to-day operations of the center, Anita and Joe were still very much a part of it. Their wisdom and influence lived on in the hearts of everyone who had been touched by their work. The center had become a place where past, present, and future merged, where the dreams of those who had come before could be realized by those who followed. One day, as Grace and Elijah prepared to celebrate the anniversary of the community center's founding, they received an unexpected visitor, an elderly man who had been one of the very first volunteers when the center opened. He had seen firsthand the struggles, the sacrifices, and the triumphs. He had watched as the center grew from a humble idea into a beacon of hope. "I just wanted to come and thank you both," the man said, his voice shaking slightly with age. "What you've built here, it's more than just a center. It's a place where people find hope, where they know they are not alone." Grace and Elijah smiled, knowing that the journey was far from over. They had built something that would last, something that would continue to inspire long after they were gone. And as they stood together, looking out over the center that had become so much more than they had ever imagined, they knew that their parents' dream had been fulfilled. Anita and Joe's legacy was alive and well, carried forward by their children, their community, and the countless lives that had been touched by the center. It was a flame that would never die, burning bright and strong for generations to come. Please smash the subscribe button for more bedtime stories. See you in the next video.